Today I'm going to explain an episode from the sci-fi show Amazing Stories called The Rift. Spoilers ahead, watch out, and take care. The story opens as a recently widowed woman, Marian Johnson, and her stepson Elijah drive down a road somewhere in Ohio. They are headed to Burlington, where Marian plans to hand over Elijah's guardianship to her sister-in-law. The poor boy doesn't know this and thinks they headed to California to start a new life. As they are driving, the GPS suddenly stops functioning, causing Marianne to miss a turn. She soon stops the car and takes a U-turn, hoping to find the right path, but this is when something strange happens. The ground underneath them trembles and all the windows in the car shatter. A high-pitched squeal then temporarily debilitates them as a plane falls from the sky and crashes into a nearby meadow. As soon as the screeching sound stops, Elijah sprints to the edge of the road to look down at the crash. He is followed by his mother, who quickly calls 911. Meanwhile, the plane has caught fire and Elijah spots someone in the cockpit. Marian then hurriedly goes down and manages to open the canopy. The pilot, Lieutenant Theodore Cole, climbs out, but refuses to go without the photograph that's on his dashboard. Once they're clear of the burning wreck, Elijah runs over and hugs Marian. Ted also thanks her for pulling him out of danger and introduces himself as a pilot for the 2nd Squadron. He asks if the duo are British or Dutch and wonders what they're doing in Burma. A confused Elijah responds that they're in Ohio, United States, but the pilot doesn't believe it. He confidently reveals that he was in a dogfight over a ridge in Rangoon just a few seconds ago. However, his eyes suddenly fall on a nearby water tower, which shakes his entire reality. Ted grew up playing around this very water tower and immediately realizes that this place is Dayton, Ohio. BNST2. These three people, a strange, colorful storm is forming in the clouds right above them. Following this, the mother and son take Ted to the nearby hospital, where the local sheriff Parker inquires about the incident. Marian repeats whatever she was told, but the sheriff thinks the stranger is being delusional due to a head injury. On the other hand, Elijah is not as dismissive about the story as the adults. He asks his stepmother for money to buy some candy from the vending machine, but she gives him a credit card instead and tells him not to wander too far. Rather obviously, the kid heads straight into the room where the pilot is being kept. Sneaking past the officer on duty, he leans closer to look at Ted's dog tags, but the latter suddenly grabs his wrist. Ted, who still cannot grasp what has happened to him, asks Elijah why the police are guarding his room. The kid replies that it is because they think Ted is a bad guy. In response, Ted says that he was fighting the bad guys just a few hours ago. He then asks Elijah to help him escape and even offers the boy a candy bar. Ted explains that his wife gives him one as a good luck charm every time before he flies. Yeah, right, chocolate melts when you teleport. Just then an officer sees Elijah in the room and tries to get inside, but since the door is locked, he starts pounding on it furiously. Ted then nervously asks Elijah to find someone named Sheriff Simmons and tell him that his old buddy is in trouble. Shortly after, Ted opens his room's door only to be slammed to his bed. He is then held down and sedated into unconsciousness. Meanwhile, as the mother and son drive back home, Elijah reveals everything that Ted had told him. It is obvious that the kid believes the stranger is telling the truth. He even shows the chocolate bar that Ted gave him and confirms that this brand stopped production 30 years ago. Marian still believes that Ted is just suffering from a blow to the head, because I guess she didn't just hear the mic drop about the chocolate bar, but for the sake of her son, she agrees to head to the local police station to search for Sheriff Simmons. In the meantime, a group of government cars and military vehicles arrive at the creek where the plane crashed a few hours ago. The lead agent, Bill Kaminsky, is on the phone with someone. He asserts that no one should talk to Ted and that they have 7 hours to wrap up the whole situation. Kaminsky then tells the firefighters on the scene that the road is closed until further notice and they should clear the crash site 10 miles in either direction. He soon looks at the strange colorful cloud formation above the crash site through a piece of scanning equipment. Then he orders his aide Bowman to continually monitor Ted and not to let him leave without his permission. Elsewhere, Marianne and Elijah arrive at the Bradford police station and ask for Sheriff Simmons. The station chief tells them that there is no one of that name here. Meanwhile, Elijah, who is wandering near a display case in the station, sees an old photograph. He quickly opens the case and takes the photo. Before anyone can see what he is doing, once outside the station, he shows his mother the photograph, which apparently was taken in 1938. Standing in one corner of the photo is Ted in a police uniform, but Marianne is still not convinced as she believes the person could be Ted's grandfather. Back at the hospital, Ted wakes up and looks out the window only to see several soldiers pulling up. He is now beginning to suspect that there is something fishy going on here and decides to take matters in his own hands. When the orderly comes in with yet another sedative, Ted knocks him out. He then quickly changes into the orderly's uniform and sneaks out. Moments later, Bowman enters the room and sees the unconscious orderly. Realizing that Ted has escaped, she quickly orders her men to find and arrest him as soon as possible. Meanwhile, Ted finds his clothes from the hospital's laundry and casually walks outside. He gets a shock as he comes face to face with 21st century technology for the first time. Moments later, Agent Bowman sees him standing in the hospital's premises and alerts her men, but just as they reach the location, Ted steals a motorcycle from the parking lot and drives off. Can't use an iPad, but he can steal a motorcycle. Ted is hot at the crash site. Government technicians are lifting the fighter out of the creek and going through the water to find wreckage pieces, but this is when the ground shakes and a scientist reveals that they have an anomaly. Kaminsky doesn't seem surprised by this. and urges the technicians to fix the plane as soon as possible. In the meantime, Marianne stops at a gas station, and Elijah insists that the man in the photograph is Ted. He is now completely sure that Ted has somehow traveled through time. The boy also insists that time travel only pulls someone to where they belong, as if they are bound by some sort of destiny, just like Indiana Jones traveling to a time before that shitty movie was made. However, Marianne still acts ignorant and asserts that there's nothing like time travel, and she is busy checking the overheating engine. Elijah notices a letter in the glove box that has his name on it. He grabs it and immediately reads whatever is written inside. Turns out these are his adoption papers, as Marianne is planning to abandon him before heading to San Diego by herself. He is extremely hurt by this revelation and confronts her at once. Marianne explains that she promised her husband she'd always do what was best for Elijah. The poor kid wonders if he's too much trouble, but his stepmother says this isn't about him. She figures that the best chance for Elijah isn't with her and begs him not to fight her on it. As they get back in the SUV, Marianne promises that his aunt will take good care of them, and that's what matters. Well, that and the drugs that she wants to get back to. As the two are about to pull back onto the highway, Ted comes zooming down from the opposite side and stops right nearby them. Elijah reiterates his point that this is destiny and quickly asks Ted if he's in the photo. The lad confirms that he is and points out to the man standing next to him, Sheriff Simmons. Turns out the two used to work as cops before they were drafted in World War II. Upon hearing this, Marianne finally seems convinced, and she agrees to help the stranger. The three then get into the SUV and head to meet Ted's wife, Pauline. After some time, they arrive at his old home where they meet a nurse. Instead, Ted says that he's Pauline's husband, and the nurse jokingly answers he's a little young to be that. She then reveals that Pauline is at her pottery class currently and should be back in a few minutes. In the meantime, Ted notices photos of Pauline with her second husband and their children on the wall. This hurts him greatly, and he goes outside to wait. On the other hand, Marianne sits in the living room and looks up Ted's obituary online. It says that the pilot crashed on the 21st of September, 1941, and was killed while trying to evade capture. Just then, a newscast on the TV reports that Elijah has been abducted, and the nurse sees it. She immediately phones the police without letting anyone else know about it. In no time, several police cars approach the house. When Ted notices this, he goes inside to warn the others, and then rushes out the back door. There are several soldiers along with Agent Kaminsky waiting for him outside. A frightened Ted puts his hands up as the agents slowly approach him, but instead of arresting him, Kaminsky says that they're here simply to get Ted back to where he belongs. The ground shakes right at this moment, and Bowman reveals that it's a seismic tremor caused by Ted being here in this timeline. Kaminsky then adds that Ted has traveled into the future, and they need to immediately send him back to his own era. Suddenly, Elijah runs out and informs Ted that he died in Burma and never returned home after the war. He then somehow leads him to the SUV, and the duo bolts out away from the spot. Since Ted grew up in this area, he is easily able to shake off the pursuing soldiers. They stop after a while and cross a nearby river to get to an old abandoned house. As they walk around the house, Ted claims that he doesn't belong here and maybe should go back. In response, Elijah says that just like Ted, he has nowhere to go as his stepmother just wants to drop him off with his aunt. He also shows a picture of his father and explains that he died in a war in Afghanistan a year ago. The pilot expresses his condolences but reiterates that this world has nothing for him now. Following this emotional conversation, the two sit down on a bench overlooking the river. This is when Elijah says that there's a way Ted can avoid dying in Burma. He suggests that Ted should go back with a Kevlar vest so the enemy soldiers can't hurt him. Kid Kevlar is not going to do if the plane crashes that night. Kaminsky and his men take Marianne to a hangar where several engineers are reassembling the crashed fighter jet. The agent reveals that there's more at stake than she realizes, but Marianne doesn't believe him. Kaminsky then explains that the engineers are restoring the fighter jet to what it was so that it can fly and they can send Ted back. To emphasize his point, he shows her the sites of several large-scale earthquakes and explains that they were all caused by a phenomenon called the rift. We then get to know that rifts are those holes in the space-time continuum which manifest themselves as strange, colorful cloud formations when things that came through them weren't returned in the past. Many global catastrophes occurred. Upon hearing this, Marianne is finally convinced, and she reveals that Elijah has her phone. Shortly afterwards, Bowman drives Marianne back into town along with other soldiers. The agent reveals that the rift has a will of its own and opens for a reason. It always stays open exactly for 11 hours, and she thinks something needs to happen in that time. However, Bowman has no idea what Ted needs to do during his time here. On the other hand, Ted and Elijah hear the approaching sirens and run to a nearby rail yard. Helicopter crew spots them and calls in the others, but Marianne asks Kaminsky for the chance to talk to Ted first. The latter agrees, and she calmly goes over to the pilot. As they engage in conversation, Ted says that he's ready to go back, but on one condition: he is provided with a weapon and bulletproof vest. However, Marianne tells him that he can't fight what is already predestined. She reveals that if he doesn't go back exactly the way he came through, every single person in a 10 m radius will die in some natural catastrophe. She can't possibly know that. Rather surprisingly, Ted accepts his destiny and is ready to head back. This is when Marianne says that the rift brought him here for a reason. The scene abruptly shifts as all of them head back to Pan's house, where Kaminsky gives Ted 5 minutes. The pilot goes inside and finds the love of his life in the kitchen working on a puzzle. Old as he hesitantly approaches and greets her, and she stares at him and smiles warmly. Ted apologizes for never saying goodbye and figures that she moved on. He adds that he loved her, always has and always will, but just as Ted is about to leave, Pauline shows him a pendant that she wears around her neck. This is the same pendant that he had given her all those years ago, a symbol of her love. Moments later, Kaminsky comes in to get Ted, and the pilot says goodbye to Pauline as he goes to his fighter jet. He tells Moran to stay together with Elijah. He then starts the engine and flies off to the rift right in the nick of time. As the story ends, we see that